Welcome back for another deep dive with us. This time, we're going to explore something that might just totally change how you think about evolution. Okay, so you know how we always hear about natural selection, survival of the fittest, and how that's like the main force behind how life on Earth has, changed over millions of years.
Right.
Well, get this. Some scientists are proposing that viruses, yeah, those teeny tiny things we usually think about when we get sick, they might actually be playing a way bigger part in evolution than we ever thought possible. We're actually talking about the possibility that viruses could be driving the evolution of like whole species,
Yeah.
maybe even like guiding it along a predetermined path. It's kind of a crazy idea, right?
It really makes you question that Darwinian perspective. Yeah, yeah. It's super interesting to think about how viruses, we usually think about them as just causing disease.
Right.
They could actually be like the architects of all the life we see around us.
Totally. So let's unpack this idea a bit. We've got some really cool stuff to dive into today. We've got like scientific papers and some articles that really make you think. So our mission today is to try and answer some pretty huge questions, like, are viruses really just these bad guys that make us sick? Or could they actually be, like you were saying, shaping the whole tree of life? Could those big leaps in evolution that seem so random, like how did giraffes get their crazy long necks?
Key.
Could that actually be because of viruses? And here's the biggest question of all. Is there like a plan for evolution, a blueprint? And are viruses the ones actually carrying it out?
Whoa. Those are some seriously big questions. Yeah. To even start to answer those, I think we got to make sure we're all on the same page about what a virus even is.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I think most people just know that they make us sick. But beyond that, maybe not so much.
Right, right. So let's break it down. Viruses, they're unbelievably tiny, like way smaller than even our cells. And basically, they're just genetic material, either DNA or RNA, all packaged up in a protein shell.
So like little bundles of genetic code just kind of floating around.
Exactly. And here's the catch. They can't make copies of themselves on their own. They got to sneak into a living cell and then, like, hijack its machinery to reproduce.
Oh, sneaky. They're kind of like tiny little pirates invading cells and stealing their stuff.
Haha, yeah. That's a pretty good way to put it. But here's where it gets even more interesting. While we usually think about viruses as bad guys, it turns out they're not all bad. There are some that can actually be good for us, or even necessary for, like, certain biological processes.
Hold on, wait. Beneficial viruses? That's kind of crazy.
I know, right? It doesn't seem to make sense at first. For example, there's a ton of research right now looking into how we could actually use viruses to fight cancer. Imagine, like, a virus that could target and destroy only cancer cells, but leave the healthy ones alone.
That's wild, like fighting fire with fire. So are these good viruses? Are they like a new discovery?
Not really. It's more like our understanding of viruses is always changing and evolving. We're realizing they're much more complex than we thought. And they play like all these different roles in life that we didn't know about before. One of the biggest discoveries lately suggests that the mammalian placenta, the organ that lets a fetus grow inside the mother,
Yeah, yeah.
that probably evolved because of a viral infection.
Whoa, seriously. So we mammals might owe our whole existence to a virus. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah. It really shows you how viruses can be behind some massive changes in evolution.
Okay, so we've established that viruses are more than just like these things that make us sick. They can actually drive evolutionary changes, even good ones. But how does that connect to this idea that they might be like steering evolution in a specific direction? I think the classic example of the giraffe's long neck is a good place to start thinking about this, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's something we all kind of know about, and it shows how this virus evolution theory really challenges the classic Darwinian ideas.
Okay, so let's walk through it. The usual explanation for why giraffes have such long necks is that it's all about natural selection. So giraffes with longer necks, they could reach higher up for food, right? So they had a better chance of surviving and having babies. And of course, they passed on their long neck genes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the basic idea.
It makes sense when you first think about it, but when I was reading through all the research for this deep dive, I started to see some holes in that explanation.
Totally. It kind of falls apart when you really start to think about it. Like, why didn't all the other plant-eating animals that lived with the giraffes evolve long necks too? If it was just about getting the leaves at the top of the trees, shouldn't the whole savanna be full of long-necked creatures?
Right. It seems like a pretty huge advantage, so you'd think other animals would evolve the same way, but they didn't. And there's another thing that really tripped me up the fossils. We don't see this slow, gradual change in giraffe ancestors, with their necks getting longer and longer over time. It's like they went from having, kind of normal necks to those crazy long necks pretty suddenly.
That's a really good point. The fact that we're missing those in-between giraffe fossils,
Hmm.
the ones with medium-length necks, that's a big problem for the idea that evolution happens slowly and gradually through random mutations and natural selection.
And it's not just the neck, right? To even have a neck that long, you'd need a bunch of other changes too, like a stronger heart, a way to control their blood pressure so they don't faint when they bend down, longer legs. It's like a whole makeover.
Exactly. That's what we call systemic mutations.
Hmm.
For that long neck to even work, a whole bunch of changes had to happen at the same time in a coordinated way. And that's really, really hard to explain if you think about evolution as just random mutations happening one at a time.
So it's not just about one gene changing to make a longer neck. It's like a ton of genes all changing in just the right way, all together. The chances of that happening randomly seem pretty tiny, right?
Totally. It'd be like winning the lottery over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It could happen, but it's incredibly unlikely.
So that brings us back to the big question. Could something else be going on? Something more precise? Something that's driving these changes that seem so impossible?
And that's where this virus evolution theory comes in. Maybe viruses are the missing piece of the puzzle. Maybe they're the answer.
Yeah, it's a really wild possibility to think about. Remember how we were talking about how viruses can insert their genetic material into a host's cells? That ability, which is often what makes us sick, right? Well, it might actually be like a super powerful engine for evolution.
So it's like they're these little genetic engineers just shuffling up the blueprints of life.
Exactly.
But how could they actually be driving these huge, coordinated evolutionary changes? Like, how does that even work? Well, think about it this way. When a virus infects something, it doesn't just cause those, immediate symptoms. It actually inserts its own genetic material into the host cells. And that material, it can actually become a part of the host's DNA. And that can actually change the host's traits.
So it's not just about like making you sick for a few days. It could actually be changing your genetic code.
Exactly.
Wow.
And if those changes happen to be beneficial, well, they could give that host a survival advantage. And that could lead to those traits being passed down to the next generation.
That makes sense. But wouldn't those changes be random? How could a virus lead to those like systemic mutations we see in giraffes, where so many traits have to change all at the same time in just the right way?
That's where it gets really wild. Imagine a virus that's carrying not just one gene, but a whole bunch of genes that code for multiple traits.
It's like a genetic package deal?
Exactly. Now, if that virus spreads through a population, you could start to see all those coordinated changes popping up in a bunch of different individuals at the same time. And because viral infections can spread so quickly, these changes could become a normal part of a population way faster than if you were just waiting for random individual mutations.
So instead of those changes happening super slowly over like tons of generations, a whole population could make a huge evolutionary jump in a really short amount of time. Okay, now I'm starting to see how this could explain that crazy transformation we see in giraffes.
Right. Instead of waiting around for random mutations to create a longer neck and a stronger heart and changes to their blood vessels and longer legs,
Yeah.
a virus could just deliver that whole package, boom, all at once.
Like evolution got a turbo boost.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings up another really interesting question. If viruses can be behind these big evolutionary shifts, could they have had a role in our own evolution, specifically in the development of human intelligence?
Ooh, now that's getting personal. But seriously, the evolution of our brains, our ability to use language, to think abstractly, to be creative, it's unlike anything else we see in the animal world. And it all happened pretty recently, in evolutionary terms, right?
Yeah, you're right. The development of complex cognitive abilities in humans, it happened really quickly and very recently. It's hard to explain if you're just thinking about gradual Darwinian selection.
So is it possible that, just like with the giraffe, a virus could have introduced a set of genes that basically jump-started human intelligence?
It's definitely an idea worth thinking about. Some researchers even think that that whole forbidden fruit story in the Garden of Eden, maybe it's actually a metaphor for a viral infection that totally transformed human consciousness.
Whoa.
I know, right? It's definitely more of a speculative idea, but it really highlights how this theory can challenge our whole understanding of where our intelligence came from.
That's such a wild thought. It really makes you think. So we've got viruses potentially explaining the giraffe's long neck and maybe even the spark of human intelligence. But What about this idea of like a predetermined evolutionary plan? How does that fit into all of this?
Let's think about giraffes again for a second.
Yeah.
There's this one really fascinating detail about how their bodies work that kind of adds fuel to this whole idea of a plan. Remember how we talked about how giraffes need special adaptations so they don't pass out when they bend over?
Yeah, all those changes to their circulatory system. But hold on, how could that have evolved before they had long necks? It seems like you need the long neck first, and then the body would have to figure out how to deal with it.
Exactly. And that's what's so crazy about this. Giraffes have this super intricate network of blood vessels in their heads called the retimirabile. It's like a pressure regulator. It makes sure that their brains are getting enough blood even when their heads are way down low.
Okay, so this red amerbial, it evolved before the long neck.
Yep, exactly. The evidence shows that this blood pressure system was already there, even before giraffes started evolving longer and longer necks.
So they had the like fainting protection before they even needed it. That's wild.
It is, and what it tells us is that the way giraffes evolved, it wasn't just a bunch of random reactive changes. It's like there was some kind of foreknowledge, like evolution knew it was coming.
It's like they got the accessories before the main event.
Haha, exactly. And if we think about this in terms of the virus evolution theories, it makes us wonder, are viruses just randomly changing things? Or are they actually carrying out some kind of predetermined plan?
Whoa. Okay, my mind is officially blown. So are we saying that viruses are like the messengers of evolution delivering the blueprints for what's supposed to come next? That's a pretty big concept to wrap your head around. The idea that evolution might not be totally random, that there's maybe some kind of blueprint guiding it all, and that viruses are the ones actually carrying it out. If that's really true, what does it even mean for us? Does it mean like our future is already decided?
Yeah, that's a question that's been bugging philosophers and scientists forever.
Hmm.
The idea of like a predetermined paths. It's kind of exciting, but also kind of creepy, right?
For sure. I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of comforting to think that maybe we're not just some random accident, that there's like a bigger plan unfolding.
Right.
But then does that mean we don't have free will? If everything's already decided, do our choices even matter?
It's a super complicated question. It really makes you question like what it means to have free will and to make your own choices. But maybe it's not as simple as like everything is decided or we have total free will. Maybe it's more like there's a roadmap, but there are still different routes and destinations you can choose.
So instead of like a script where every line is already written out, it's more like a choose your own adventure book. We still get to make choices, but the overall direction is kind of guided by something bigger than us.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. It means there could be this predetermined plan, but we still have the power to shape our own future, both individually and as a species.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. But it still makes you wonder if we are evolving along some specific path. Where are we even going? Like, what's the point of it all? What's the grand finale of this whole cosmic play?
Yeah, those are questions that science can't really answer. That's more philosophy or spirituality or maybe even science fiction. Science can tell us how evolution works, but the why, well, that's something we each have to figure out for ourselves.
So we're ending up with more questions than answers. Figures.
Haha, yeah. But isn't that the best part of science? It's not always about finding all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, pushing the limits of what we know and just being okay with the mysteries that are still out there.
I love that. And I think we've definitely done that today in our deep dive. We started out thinking about viruses, just these tiny little germs, and now we're thinking about them as these possible drivers of evolution, maybe even guiding it along a predetermined path. We've seen how the classic view of evolution needs some updating, and we've even touched on some really big questions about free will, destiny, and the meaning of life.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. From the microscopic world of viruses all the way to the vastness of evolutionary time. And we've encountered some really mind-blowing ideas along the way.
And who knows what other secrets those little viruses are hiding. Maybe one day we'll find out that they're even more important to the story of life than we can imagine right now.
Yeah, that's a very cool thought.
So to everyone listening, we'll leave you with this. As you're going about your day, think about just how complex and interconnected life really is. Think about those tiny little viruses and how they might be playing a much bigger role than you ever thought possible. And who knows, maybe this deep dive has sparked something in you, a curiosity to learn more, to question more, to keep exploring the amazing world around us. Until next time, keep on diving deep.